I'm gonna post this video. Don't worry. So it'll pick up your voices like vaguely, but it'll mainly pick up mine because I'm like literally in front of the laptop. Yeah, no, it's gonna. So the good thing about this is that this updates as I write. So every time you refresh Google Classroom and you click that note, this will be already filled out. Yeah. So like I said, so a function is a relation where each of the x-axis with each value of the x-axis corresponds with one value of the y-axis. So the example on the right is a function because each x value has one y value. The one on the left is not a function because when x is equal to 1, it has the y values of 3 and 4, which cannot happen. And a visual way to see if it's a function is through the vertical line test. So I'm going to give you guys two examples. So I'm going to give you a graph here, and I'm going to give you a graph over here. And you guys are going to tell me if you guys remember what a vertical line test is, if it's a function or not a function. And don't freak out. These are not graphs you're going to be learning this year. Okay. So who can tell me what they think a vertical line test is? Anyone want to take a stab? How do I use the vertical line test? Cynthia? You draw a line straight down, doesn't matter where. So I can draw a line straight down. Does my blue line hit 1 point on the graph only? Yes. So, and I can draw anywhere else. So I can draw a blue line here, and it's going to only hit 1 point each time. So is my first graph a function? Yes. Good. Now let's go to my circle. If I draw a vertical line straight down, how many points does it hit on that graph? 2. So is this a function? No, not a function. So this is not a function. So now there's something called a domain and a range, something you guys probably have not heard of or maybe did and forgot. Have you guys heard of something called domain and range? Okay, you guys remember what it means? Okay, does domain have to do, think of just the words itself. Which one has to do with the x-axis? When you think, okay, when you think of the word range, what do you think it means? When you think of the word range, what comes to mind?
Like space.
Yeah, so space, and which way are you going? So what axis that has?
Oh, the Y.
Yeah. So your range has to do with the values in the y-axis, and your domain has to do with your values in the x-axis. What that basically means is where does your graph exist in the x-axis? Like can the graph go through all of the x values, or does it start at one x value and stop at another x value? Same with the y's. Yeah. So your domain has to do with your x values, so where your function or where your graph exists on the x-axis, and then your range has to do with the y value. So for example, does your graph have like a maximum y value? Does it have a minimum y value? Like what's the deal with all of that? So let's put this into practice. So this is a brief introduction into domain and range. But the first question I want to ask you guys for A, B, and C is also to say, is it a function? So we're going to do 3 things. So we're going to name our, is it a function, which is 1. For number 2, we're going to state the domain. And for 3, we're going to state our range. So we're going to do the same thing for all of these guys. So we'll do 1A last, actually, because that's the hardest one. We'll do B and C first. Okay. So let's start with, is it a function for all of them? For A, if you were to draw a vertical line anywhere in the graph, is it a function?
Yes.
Okay, because this guy hits 1 point here and it hits 1 point there. So yes, it is a function. Okay, domain and range we will worry about after. Now for the next one, we have a, what would you call this? A mapping thing? A diagram thing? I forget the actual name of it. So what you have to look for here is to determine if this is a function, is if each x value has only one y value. Now look at this one carefully for B. Is this a function or not a function? And tell me why. Camilla?
It's not,
Okay, not a function. Why not?
because it fits like 2 points, not just one.
Which x value has two y values? 6. So
Oh, yeah.
6 has 2 and 3. This is not allowed. All right, good. And now the last one, 1, 3, 5, and 7 are my x's, and y is 2, 4, 8. Is this a function or not a function? Yes, Cynthia?
For B,
Mhm.
the 7 and the 2 is not allowed?
No, oh, sorry, whoops. The 1 and the 3, my bad. I circled the wrong thing. So C, function or no function? Function, okay. So in this case, it's a function because each x value has just one y value assigned to itself. So for example, even though 1 and 5 are the x values and they both have 4, that's still one y value for each of those. However, if it was like 1 and 4 and then 1 and 8, that's not allowed either. So remember, the y's can have multiple x values, but the x's cannot have multiple y values to them. So I said we're going to leave A by itself for now. We're going to do the easy stuff. So for B, what is my domain? What are the x values that are present in B? Jade? Yep. You're going to do a fancy bracket, and it's going to be 5, 6, 7. That would be your domain. Now my range has to do with my y. So what is my range? Let's see someone else. What is my range? Rebecca? Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. So can someone tell me for C what my domain is for C, Emma?
The domain for
For
three is going to be 1, 3, 5,
Yep,
7.
1, 3, 5, 7. And what's my range, Ashton? Okay. So the difference between B and C and A is that A is a graph. So A is the most difficult one because it requires a specific notation. So when we have a quiz for the first half of this unit, I'm not going to include graphs as your domain or your range because there's a separate lesson on domain and range. This is just an intro to it. But let's see if you guys can come up with a domain and range for A. So if you don't notice in A, there's supposed to be these little arrows at the end of the graph. Does anyone know what those arrows mean? At the tips, it continues. Okay. So let's see if you guys can figure out the domain and the range for this graph A. So what would my domain be for A? Let's see. Paulina? Okay. Okay. That's good. So in this case, if you guys notice over here, did these have arrows to begin with? Oops, hold on. Did that graph have arrows to begin with? Yes or no? If I zoom in, hold on. Does it have arrows?
Yeah.
And the x and y axis have arrows, but I'm talking about the actual curve.
Oh, no.
No. So because it doesn't have arrows, what does that mean? Does the graph stop there or does it continue going? Stops. Why am I? No. I don't want to authorize you. No. So like Paulina said, my domain is going to be -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, not 0. She didn't say 0. Oops. Okay, can anyone explain to me why 0 is not one of them? Paulina? Yep. Yep. Does my graph ever cross the y-axis in this one? No. Okay. Does it ever cross the x-axis? No. Okay, which is why 0 is not included. What is my range then? What are the y values that this thing goes through? Cynthia.
-2, -3, -4, -5.
Okay, what else?
2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep. So basically the same thing as my domain. Okay. So I'm gonna write it in this notation for now. Okay. It's like kind of right, but not right. I don't want to teach you guys the actual way to write it yet because you guys are just gonna get confused, and I'm not trying to deal with that confusion right now. I'd rather deal with it later than now because the whole point of this is to get you guys introduced to functions and what they look like. Because if I start writing this,
Oh, no, thank you.
exactly. No, thank you for now.
What?
Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, that's why I said I don't want to write it like that.
Yeah.
So this one, this we're gonna learn later. This is for later. Ignore. Okay, so don't worry about this notation right now. Just focus on what we did in class. Okay? So we're gonna have to learn about this eventually, but just not today. So you guys don't have to worry about this for another 4 days probably.
Monday.
Yep, because your domain is contained in a set of numbers. So when you write those brackets, that means you're writing out a set of numbers.
But like,
No, domain and range usually have the fancy brackets. I don't know why they did it. Like I said, math is usually a bunch of people coming together and agreeing on something, and that's how that something is done. So take a moment to copy that down. Yes, Cynthia? Yep. Can you go too? Okay, what's up?
how would you write it if it did continue?
Oh, don't worry about that. I don't want to confuse you. I'm trying to avoid confusion right now. Can someone verify if this is actually updating on Google Classroom?
If I have the
If you have reception. Yep, of course. That's fine.
Question,
Yep.
right? So the y values can have multiple x values, but the x
Mhm.
values can't have multiple y values.
Yep.
That's all. Okay.
that is
Does? Okay, cool. So D will skip because that one is just weird. Okay, so we'll skip this for another day. And we'll also skip this guy because again, you guys are gonna freak out. Skip, skip. So for E, is it a function or not a function? Paulina? Not a function because as you can see, 5 and 5 have two y values. Okay, thank you. So what's my domain then for 2? For E, sorry. What's my domain for E? What are the x values? Jade?
5, 3, 8.
Mhm.
And would you repeat that?
Nope. And preferably, I would want you to write them in order. Okay, and what's my range? What are the y values that this takes? Paulina? We'll do -9, -1, 2, 4. So that would be your range. So remember, D and F we are skipping because I don't want to use new notation yet. What do you got? 6 minutes? Oh, yeah. Okay, and last but not least, let's do the test scores. So is this a function or not a function for G?
How would you know? Not a function.
Why?
it's not a function.
What if it's Kevin F and Kevin W? Exactly. So that's why it's not a function. There's two Kevins. As you can see, there's two Kevins. So what is my domain? What are the names that I have? Jade?
Kevin, Sarah, and Teresa.
Kevin, Sarah, Teresa. Okay, and what's my range? Elisa?
4, 5, 7, 8.
4, 5, 7, and 8. Okay, so the last one, we need to find which of the variables has to do with domain and which one has to do with range. So remember, your domain has to do with your independent variable because that is x, and your range is your y, which is dependent variable. So for number 3, we have water bill and the number of people in the family. So which one of those two would be my independent variable? So does water bill depend on the number of people in the family, or does the number of people of the family depend on the water bill? Yep. So which one would be my domain? Nope. Say it again, Camilla.
The water bill depends on how many people.
So remember, y depends on x. So the water depends on the people. Okay, which means my range would have to do with the water bill. And my domain would have to do with number of people.
water bill,
Mhm.
that should be.
Yep, because the water bill, the price of the water bill depends on how many people are in the family. If you have one person, it's going to be less. If you have more people, it's going to be more. Yes, Annabella?
So wait, which one's the independent variable?
So independent would be your x. So independent is x, and dependent has to do with your y. So we'll do one more, and then we'll call it a day after this. So the next one is test marks versus time spent studying. So which one depends on what? How would you read that as a sentence, Emma?
Time spent studying, test marks
Mm-hmm.
depend on time spent
Yep.
studying, so that means that X is time spent
Yep.
studying, Y is.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so that would be it for today. There's our homework schedule on Google Classroom. So please do attempt the homework. And if you have any questions about the homework,